I'm not the kind of man who gets walked over, ever. On the surface, you'd probably think I'm just an average guy, maybe even likable. Running a chain of convenience stores teaches you how to connect with people, how to be approachable. Most people would describe me as easygoing, maybe even friendly. But if you cross me, that's when you meet the side of me you'd never want to see. I don't deal in petty revenge. I deliver calculated, devastating vengeance. Let me paint you a picture. I wasn't always a businessman. Back in the day, I was a rugby player, still am on occasion. As a second row forward, I was tall, solidly built, and faster than I looked. During one intense match, I was chasing a high ball when it happened. Out of nowhere, their loose head prop, a hulking guy twice my weight, slammed into me midair. I crashed to the ground hard, my shoulder screaming in pain, my vision spinning from the concussion. The referee waved it off as accidental. But when I saw that smug grin on his face as I left the field, I knew it wasn't. I'm not one to let things slide. Pain fueled my determination, and when the team doctor cleared me to play again, I was back on the pitch with one goal in mind: make him regret it. What followed wasn't a random act of aggression. It was precise, methodical. A ruck formed, and he got possession. As he lumbered forward, I saw my moment. My body moved before my mind caught up. A perfectly timed shove, an accidental tumble, and the weight of another player coming down on his arm. The crack was unmistakable. He left the field that day with a fractured forearm, and I left with a swollen shoulder and a small, secret satisfaction. Was it cruel? Perhaps, but that's the kind of man I am. If you think that was harsh, you haven't heard anything yet. What I did on that rugby field was just a warm-up for the revenge I'd soon be forced to unleash in my personal life. A betrayal far deeper, far more personal. This isn't just a story about revenge. It's about how far someone can go when pushed to their limit. And believe me, I have limits. But when someone crosses them, they'd better be prepared to face the consequences. Years after that rugby match, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. My business was thriving, with multiple convenience stores running smoothly under my watch. I had a strong team of employees who respected me, and a wife I thought I could trust with my life. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that trust is a fragile thing, easily shattered and impossible to repair. It started innocently enough. Lisa, my wife, began withdrawing cash from our joint account. At first, I didn't think much of it. We had a good life, and I earned enough to support us comfortably. But Lisa wasn't the type to carry cash. She preferred using her debit card for everything. The withdrawals became more frequent and larger in amount, and my gut told me something wasn't right. Suspicion is a strange thing. It starts as a whisper, a nagging thought at the back of your mind. But the more you try to ignore it, the louder it grows. At first, I tried to rationalize her behavior. Maybe she was saving for something special, a surprise gift for me, perhaps. Or maybe she had picked up an expensive hobby. But deep down, I knew there was another possibility, one I didn't want to admit. I decided to investigate, not out of paranoia, but because I needed answers. My stores were equipped with top-of-the-line security systems, including discrete cameras over the tills. The thought of bringing that level of surveillance into my home felt excessive, like crossing an invisible line. So I opted for a subtler approach. One evening, while Lisa was engrossed in her favorite TV show, I casually brought up a new gadget I'd picked up. "Hey Lisa, let me back up the contacts on your phone. This new software can save all your numbers in case your phone ever dies." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I think my battery's dead," she said a little too quickly. "No problem," I replied, keeping my tone light. "It'll power up from the computer. Just a quick backup. It'll only take a minute." After a long pause, she reluctantly handed over her phone. That hesitation was all the confirmation I needed. Something was off. I connected her phone to the computer, backing up her contacts and saving the data to a folder labeled under her name. As I handed the phone back, I made sure to act as casual as possible. "All done. If you ever lose your numbers, they're saved here." She asked if the folder was password protected, but I played it cool. "No need. It's just for you." She nodded, but I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes before she turned her attention back to the TV. That night, after Lisa went to bed, I opened the folder on my computer and started combing through her contacts. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. One name stood out like a red flag: Mark Donovan. I knew who he was: a competitor in the convenience store business, and, insult to injury, a former football player. It wasn't just the name that bothered me, it was the frequency. A quick check of her phone records revealed that Lisa had been calling Mark multiple times a day. My stomach churned as the pieces began falling into place. This wasn't just friendly chatter or business-related talks. Something deeper, something darker was going on. For the first time in years, I felt completely out of control. My mind raced with questions. Was she using my hard-earned money to fund an affair? How long had this been going on? And most importantly, what was I going to do about it? But one thing was certain: I wouldn't act without proof. If there's one thing rugby taught me, it's to play the long game, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And this time, my patience would pay off. When you suspect someone you love is betraying you, the need for answers becomes an obsession. But I'm not one to act blindly. I'm a planner, a strategist. Before confronting Lisa, I needed concrete evidence, something irrefutable that left no room for excuses or manipulation. I decided to hire a private investigator, someone who could uncover the truth without tipping her off. I flipped through the local directory and deliberately avoided using the same security firm that managed my stores. Mark Donovan was in the same business as me, and if he had ties to the firm, it could complicate things. Instead, I found a smaller agency in a nearby town, far enough away to avoid suspicion. The investigator, an ex-cop with a no-nonsense demeanor, seemed like the right fit. I handed him a recent photo of Lisa and gave him the details: track her movements, find out where she goes, and most importantly, who she's meeting. He estimated it would take a week and asked for a 1,000-pound retainer. I paid him on the spot, no hesitation. I wasn't just looking for closure, I was building a case, preparing for whatever fallout might come next. In the meantime, I decided to keep playing the role of the unsuspecting husband. If Lisa suspected I was on to her, she might cover her tracks, and I couldn't risk that. Instead, I focused on my work, pouring my energy into the stores. But the tension in our home was palpable. Every interaction felt strained, every word carefully chosen. Lisa seemed distracted, distant, but I pretended not to notice. A few days later, the investigator called with an update. "She's meeting a man regularly," he said. "Mark Donovan, just as you suspected. But there's someone else too, a second man." A second man. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. One betrayal was bad enough, but two? It wasn't just infidelity, it was a mockery of our marriage. The investigator promised to dig deeper, to get me the proof I needed. While I waited, I decided to take matters into my own hands. Lisa had been acting too comfortable, as if she believed I'd never find out. I needed to unsettle her, to remind her that I wasn't a man to be underestimated. And so I began planning the first phase of my revenge. It started with something small, almost playful. Lisa was meticulous about her appearance, always particular about her clothes. That gave me an idea. I picked up some fresh chilies from one of my stores and carefully extracted the juice. With a hypodermic needle, I injected a small amount into the crotch of her underwear, just enough to cause discomfort without drawing suspicion. I wasn't done yet. I repeated the process with her tampons, knowing it would add to her misery without leaving obvious traces. Was it petty? Perhaps, but it was also satisfying. This was just the beginning, a subtle reminder that actions have consequences. I didn't know how far I was willing to go yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wouldn't let her walk away unscathed. By the end of the week, the investigator delivered the final pieces of the puzzle. He handed me a folder filled with photos and reports. There it was, undeniable proof of Lisa's betrayal. Pictures of her with Mark Donovan, their secret meetings at secluded locations. And then there was the second man, a sales rep named Paul Daniels, whose presence added another layer of insult to the injury. The evidence was damning. Lisa wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a double life, using my money to fund her escapades. The rage I felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. But I didn't let it consume me. Instead, I channeled it into something more productive. It was time to move to the next phase of my plan. Lisa had no idea what was coming, but she would soon learn that crossing me was the biggest mistake of her life. By the time I had everything I needed, my anger had transformed into a cold, calculated resolve. There would be no screaming, no messy emotional outbursts. I would confront Lisa with the same precision I used to build my business and play rugby. Every step would be deliberate, every move designed to leave her no room to wiggle out of the truth. That evening, I waited until she came home. She looked tired, disheveled, but she still greeted me with the same indifferent smile that now made my skin crawl. I poured myself a drink, sat down in the living room, and invited her to join me. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my tone neutral. Her brow furrowed, but she sat down across from me. "What's this about?" I reached for the folder on the coffee table and slid it toward her. "Open it." She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she flipped through the contents. Her face drained of color with every page. Photos of her and Mark Donovan, candid shots of her slipping into Paul Daniels' flat, and a detailed report from the investigator. When she finally looked up at me, her expression was a mix of panic and disbelief. "You've been spying on me?" she stammered. "I've been uncovering the truth," I replied, my voice steady. "And now that I have it, I want you out of my house." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I interrupted, leaning forward. "You've been using my money to cheat on me with not one, but two men. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just sit here and let you make a fool of me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "Please let me explain," she begged. "There's nothing to explain," I said coldly. "The evidence speaks for itself. Pack your things and leave. You're not my wife anymore." Her sobs filled the room as she pleaded with me, but I was unmoved. I grabbed a roll of bin bags from the kitchen and began tossing her belongings into them without a second thought. She followed me upstairs, still crying, but I ignored her. The trust was gone, shattered beyond repair, and no amount of apologies could fix it. Once her things were packed, I carried them to her car, yanked the house key off her keyring, and handed her the rest. "Go," I said firmly, "and don't come back." She stood there for a moment, her face streaked with tears, before finally getting into the car and driving away. As the taillights disappeared into the night, I felt a strange mix of emotions, anger, relief, and an overwhelming sense of emptiness. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. But so was the betrayal, the lies, and the weight of pretending everything was okay. I returned to the house, grabbed a beer, and sank into my recliner. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. The love I once felt for Lisa was now a distant memory, replaced by the bitter taste of betrayal. But even as I sat there, nursing my drink, I knew this wasn't the end. The fallout wasn't just about Lisa. Mark Donovan and Paul Daniels had played their parts in this mess, and they weren't going to walk away unscathed. My plans for them were already forming in my mind. If Lisa thought she was the only one facing consequences, she was dead wrong. This was just the beginning. With Lisa gone, the house felt emptier, but my focus sharpened. She wasn't the only one who had betrayed me. Mark Donovan and Paul Daniels had played their parts, and they were next on my list. This wasn't just about personal satisfaction. It was about sending a message. No one crosses me without consequences. First, I turned my attention to Mark Donovan. He'd been a thorn in my side for years, not just as a competitor in the convenience store business, but now as a man who had stolen from me in the most personal way. His arrogance on the football field only fueled my resolve. Donovan was a regular at the local recreation center, where he played five-a-side football with a group of mates. I occasionally joined those games for fitness, and my participation had always been lighthearted, until now. This time I had a purpose. Donovan didn't suspect a thing when I showed up for the game. I made sure to keep things friendly, cracking jokes and acting as though nothing was wrong. When it was my turn in goal, Donovan saw it as an opportunity to humiliate me. He pressed forward with the ball, trying to show off. But I was ready. Each time he tried to score, I blocked his shots with precision, making him look foolish. His frustration grew, and he started taking cheap shots, aiming kicks at my shins and elbows at my ribs. I laughed it off, playing the innocent fool, but inside I was counting down to my moment. Then it came. During a tight play, Donovan lunged for the ball, his movements reckless and overconfident. I timed my response perfectly. As he extended his leg, my boot connected with his knee. Not hard enough to be blatant, but with just enough force to twist it in an unnatural way. The sound of tearing ligaments was unmistakable, followed by his guttural scream as he collapsed to the ground. Feigning concern, I rushed to his side. "Sorry, mate. I didn't mean to. Just bad timing on my part," I said, offering a hand to help him up. But he couldn't stand. The damage was done. The others backed me up, having seen his earlier antics. No one suspected a thing. An ambulance was called, and as they loaded him up, I made a show of offering to drive his car home for him. Of course, he refused, but the look of rage on his face told me he knew. He just couldn't prove it. That was the beauty of my plan. Next on my list was Paul Daniels. He was a supplier, providing sundry items to stores like mine. Sewing kits, fuses, small knickknacks. Unlike Donovan, Daniels wasn't a public figure. He operated in the shadows, much like his affair with Lisa. But that didn't mean I couldn't find a way to make him pay. Rumors travel fast in small circles, and with a few carefully placed comments, I ensured his indiscretions became public knowledge. It turned out Lisa wasn't the only wife he'd been seeing. Another husband, angrier and less controlled than me, took matters into his own hands. Daniels ended up in the hospital after a severe beating, his reputation in tatters. Karma has a way of catching up with people, but sometimes it needs a little push. Daniels' business suffered, and soon he was no longer a player in the market. I didn't need to lift a finger beyond planting the seeds of his downfall. As for Lisa, she wasn't spared from the fallout either. Our divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. She ended up with the house, but I made sure she also took on the mortgage. Without my income to support her, she struggled to keep up with the payments. Eventually, the house went on the market, and she disappeared from my life altogether. By the time the dust settled, I was in control again. Donovan's injury ended his football days, and I acquired two of his best-performing stores at bargain prices. Daniels was out of the picture entirely, and Lisa was nothing more than a bitter memory. But revenge isn't just about retribution. It's about reclaiming power. And I'd done exactly that. The people who thought they could betray me learned the hard way that I'm not a man to be trifled with. Still, as satisfying as it was, something inside me felt hollow. The victories tasted sweet, but they didn't erase the pain. I knew I had to find a way forward, one that didn't involve living in the shadow of betrayal. As the chaos subsided and my life returned to a semblance of normalcy, I found myself sitting in the quiet of my office, staring out the window. The revenge I'd planned so meticulously had played out perfectly. Lisa was gone, Donovan was hobbled and humiliated, and Daniels had been all but erased from the scene. Yet instead of the triumph I expected, there was an emptiness that lingered. Revenge, it turns out, is a fleeting satisfaction. It gave me control in the moment, but it didn't heal the deeper wounds. The betrayal had left scars, not just on my trust in others, but on the way I viewed myself. For years, I'd built my life around proving my strength, on the rugby field, in my business, and in my personal life. But now, staring at the aftermath of it all, I realized it was time for a change. Mary, my store's unofficial agony aunt, was the first to call me out on it. "Boss," she said one afternoon, barging into my office uninvited, "you've got to let this go. You've proved your point. To them, to yourself, to everyone. Now it's time to move on." I raised an eyebrow at her. "Move on? Just like that?" She sat down across from me, her gaze firm. "You're a good man. You've built something solid here. Your stores, your relationships with your staff. People trust you. But this vindictive streak of yours, it doesn't suit you. You're better than that." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Maybe she was right. I'd spent so much of my life reacting to challenges, proving my worth, that I'd forgotten what it meant to just live. For the first time in years, I started thinking about what I wanted, not out of spite or competition, but for myself. I took small steps at first. I joined a hiking group and found solace in the simplicity of walking through nature. The fresh air and the quiet gave me space to think. On one of those hikes, I met someone, a woman who wasn't tied to my past, who saw me not as the man consumed by revenge, but as someone with potential. We took things slow, and for once, I felt no need to rush or control the outcome. Rugby remained a part of my life, but it changed too. It was no longer about proving my dominance or taking out my frustrations. It became a way to stay fit, to connect with others, and to enjoy the game for what it was. I even started coaching a local youth team, passing on the lessons I'd learned, not just about rugby, but about resilience and finding purpose. My business thrived in the background. The stores practically ran themselves thanks to the systems I'd put in place and the trust I'd built with my staff. I realized that I didn't need to micromanage or prove myself every step of the way. I'd earned the respect of my team and my community, and that was enough. As for Lisa, Donovan, and Daniels, they became little more than footnotes in my story. Lisa struggled to rebuild her life after the divorce, eventually selling the house and disappearing from my radar. Donovan's injury left him bitter and out of shape, while Daniel's reputation never recovered. Karma had done its job, and I had no reason to look back. Instead, I focused on building something new. I traveled more, explored new hobbies, and allowed myself to enjoy life without the weight of resentment. Revenge might have been the driving force for a time, but it didn't define me. What defined me was what came after. The decision to let go and move forward. And that, dear listener, is the most important lesson I can share. Betrayal might knock you down, but it's what you do after that matters. You can let it consume you, or you can rise above it. I chose to rise, and I hope you'll do the same. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.